Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, former Harvard professor and prominent public intellectual Cornel West has thrown his hat into the ring. He's going to run. We're going to discuss that as well as FAMU, the HBCU in Florida, has launched a lawsuit over funding. We're going to also discuss that and more with the one, the only, the publisher of the Washington Informer, Denise Roloff Barnes. Good morning, Denise.
Good morning, Stacey Brown. How are you?
I am doing good. It's always a good day when I started with you. How about
Well, hey, thank you so very much. Thank you, thank you, thank
I
you.
know you probably what is it? Forewent your personal trainer just to hang out with us. So
Yes, well, we make these New Year's resolutions, right?
uh-huh.
And I'm gonna say this a little bit because this is Black Men's Health Month, and not that Black men should be concerned about their health 12 months, 365 days a year, but
Yes.
this is important. And so I'm glad to have a really great trainer who's very encouraging, because he said to me yesterday, he said, at your age,
All of 35 years old, but go
he
ahead.
said, I'm just so inspired because you're so dedicated. And when you go to a doctor and the doctor tells you, oh, your cholesterol is high, and oh, you're pre-diabetic. I'm like, what is pre-diabetes? What does that mean? So I told the doctor, I'll be right back. And I went to Planet Fitness and I spotted a trainer. I mentioned the place because maybe they'll support the show one day.
Mhm.
But anyway, hired a trainer and I said, look, we got to get on this. And so actually, it's been almost 2 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so I would encourage anybody, male, female, old, young, able, or challenged, get on out there. There's a guy that comes in every single day who's confined to a wheelchair every day.
Wow.
I'm really
Wow.
inspired by him. We made a
So
story on him,
so
so
your cholesterol and everything changed.
it hasn't.
I was just about to be inspired.
It has not. But well, and that's a good thing, right? That's the point. It's a good thing. It's still cholesterol is high, I think, because it's hereditary, so
Okay.
it's been high since I was in my 20s, 5 years ago. But no, but as long as it stays I'm okay.
Right, right.
I'm okay. If I can make it go away, that would be fine. But if I don't do anything, then it will change, and it won't change for the good. So
Right.
that's my mission.
All right.
All
Enough
right.
enough for all that good inspiration. Denise, former Harvard professor and
Oh,
prominent
not
public.
me. Okay, I thought no.
Denise is running for president. Y'all heard it
Howard,
here first.
Howard, not Harvard. Howard. But go ahead.
Oh, you heard Howard?
No, you said Denise, former Harvard professor. I'm just
Oh,
just messing.
well, I mean, I can see you as a Harvard professor,
Mm, okay, go
a
ahead.
professor of journalism.
All
There
right.
you go. But anyway, former Harvard professor and prominent public intellectual Dr. Cornel West has mounted a third party run for president. He announced it and a video posted on Twitter. He is a supporter, surrogate, and confidant of Bernie Sanders, we know. And during the senator's presidential runs in 16 and 20, uh, Cornel West really supported Bernie Sanders. He's a leading Democratic socialist activist of his generation, is what people describe Dr. West as. But let's cut to the chase, Denise. Your reaction when you heard that Cornel West was entering the presidential race?
Well, I say the games have begun, and we're about to see an interesting platform, or what is it, lineup of candidates on both sides who know they have no chances of winning. And I said he must have some other mission, which we did hear about, and the fact that he's going to, like Reverend Jackson did. I mean, Reverend Jackson had a really good chance,
Hmm.
much better than I think Cornel West has. but at least he was able to put on the table some issues and to force candidates to talk about issues that they might not have ordinarily discussed, and in the way that he can force them to talk about them. So Reverend Jackson did it. I think there have been others, and that's my hope that, you know, Cornel West will come out of this not looking like the nutty professor, but a real candidate, you know, who really brings issues to the table and calls people out. The thing I'm most concerned about, Stacey, and you might know this already and written about it, the low voter turnout, right? People are so disengaged right now with politics.
Well, I
And
think that's definitely going to be a problem next year for a lot of reasons. And you just hit the nail on the head with one of them, the disenchantment. We talk a lot on this program. We've discussed a lot what the administration has accomplished, what they haven't accomplished, but more importantly, they may have accomplished more for African Americans than any other administration. However, African Americans may not see it that way. And it doesn't sound like they do as a whole see it that way.
well, and I think it's more of what's happening. I don't know. I just read a very interesting article in one of those other newspapers about the Pennsylvania, about the Philadelphia mayoral election and how low the turnout was, and particularly since it's a predominantly, I mean, not predominantly, but it has a large Black population in Philly, you know, the numbers were down to like 37% turnout. And that was lower than I think 2 or 4 years ago. So, you know, it's the local elections, I think, that we still need to keep our eyes on. The national, of course, the, you know, presidential election is folks just don't feel like their lives have been changed
Right.
at all. And this generation of voters, you know, really are disconnected
Yeah.
politically because of their frustration, not because of their lack of interest.
And the local, we talked to someone recently. I know I talked to the vice president who mentioned the local elections, but then there was others who've been mentioning the local, the school board, the city council, the mayors, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing with this People's Party that Cornel West is a part of, Power 96 brings up, he will take away votes from Joe Biden in states like Georgia. That's a concern, because you also have, don't forget, you also have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running as a Democrat against the president. Now, when it comes to the general election, after the primaries are over, that probably won't matter. But this situation with Cornel West, though, the People's Party will be around for the general election.
Yeah, and you know, we have always, I think, in many ways, talked about having. I'm going to use the phrase alternative. I don't know what the correct phrase is, but
Third party.
Third party, yeah, third other parties, yeah, third party candidates in the election, just to have that choice and that exposure to different points of views that are not considered party line views, right? So it would seem to me that, you know, that's a good choice, again, nationally as well as again local. You know, to have there are a growing number of independents across the country, and so, you know, their votes to get, and a People's Party might be successful with that. I don't know how much they'll take away from Biden. These are probably folks who probably wouldn't have voted for him anyway, and but may want to vote and decide, what the heck, let me go ahead and throw my vote to Cornel West, because I'm not going to vote Democrat and I'm not going to vote Republican.
Well, you know, there's been this push, and we've talked about this too on this program. Ice Cube has been talking a lot about a third party, and because of being disenchanted with the Democrats, they will, you know, there are many African American voters who will not cast a ballot for a Republican. They are looking for an alternative, and perhaps Cornel West will be that alternative that they do go into the ballot box for, and you know, pull the lever and for his name, take it where they otherwise would have pulled it for Biden, because a lot of times, Denise, and you know this, that a person will go in that ballot box and they'll say, well, the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, yeah, if they go in at all,
If they go in at all.
you know, they'll look and pick and maybe close their nose or close their eyes and check a box or push a button. You're correct. And I think as we have this long line, growing line of Republican candidates, I have been listening to a couple of these town halls. It looks like out of South Carolina, the governor of South Carolina, former
Yes.
governor.
Nikki
Anyway, it
Haley.
looks like I don't know, I'm getting brain freeze here, but folks were somewhat impressed with her performance. I'll put it that way. And, we've got a lot more to listen to. And I'm not saying that, Democrats should vote Republican or what have you, but I think we are at a point in time now where we need to look at messages and look at history, and really make informed decisions and not necessarily party line decisions when we go to the ballot box.
Yeah, folks, coming up in a moment, we're going to talk about a topic that Denise originally brought to us when she was watching the show. She actually typed into the comments about the Phantom Freeway Killer. We're going to discuss that momentarily. But first, a Florida judge is allowing a class action lawsuit to go forward that accuses the state of discriminating against a historically Black university while prioritizing its largest public university, which is predominantly white. Judge Robert Hinkle of the Northern District of Florida heard oral arguments this week in the first court test for a class action lawsuit filed in September by students of FAMU. The 6 students who filed the suit claimed that the University of Florida receives a larger state appropriation per student than FAMU. The complaint says that over 33 years, from 1987 to 2020, that shortfall amounted to approximately $1.3 billion. Denise, it's an interesting case down in Florida, of all places in Florida.
No question. And I think the example that gives these students hope is what we've seen in the state of Maryland. The HBCUs, Morgan State, Bowie State, Maryland Eastern Shore, all of them filed. I think they filed. I don't want to make up facts, but the government recognized that the University of Maryland and the white universities were getting much more funding than the HBCUs in the state of Maryland. And while they, I think, were successful, now they're just waiting for the money. And this is a couple years old. So these students, of course, won't benefit by their actions, but their successors, the students that come behind them, will. I think it's a great push that they're making. It will certainly, it's Florida, so who knows? And we don't know whether this is a Trump appointed judge or what, but the point is, I think it's worth the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep our eye on that. You can read about it. You can read about it in the Washington Informer.
Yes.
WashingtonInformer.com. Now to a topic that, again, Denise brought to our attention. But first, let's begin with this clip.
First dispatcher, someone that we spoke with, said that, oh, she's 18. She could come home in just a couple days. So for 2 weeks, you couldn't even think. You can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't. We knew something was wrong.
If they're classified as runaways, you don't get the same response. You don't get Amber Alerts.
She was so important.
In a significant step toward addressing the distressing issue of missing Black women, missing and murdered Black women, Minnesota has taken a groundbreaking initiative by establishing the nation's first ever Office of Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls. The state's decision to confront this profoundly troubling trend comes as a response to the countless untold and unsolved stories that have plagued the community for far too long. State officials established a task force under the direction of Lakeisha Lee, whose sister, as you saw in that clip, Brittany Clardy vanished and died 10 years prior. She was only 18 at the time. She had gone missing, and authorities found her lifeless body in the trunk of a car. Lee remembered the anguish her family experienced and the frustration with law enforcement's initial response. That history making development in Minnesota, while something to build on for other jurisdictions, is also a stark reminder of American justice's history of investigating missing and murdered African Americans. That history dates back decades, perhaps centuries. And for example, if the 1960s, let's say it that way, if the 1960s helped spread a message of living in harmony in America, that free love thing, the 1970s brought one of living in fear. There was the co-ed killer, the Son of Sam, Hillside Strangler, dating game killer, the Zodiac killer, and many more serial killers. In many ways, terrifying serial killers were as synonymous with the 1970s as Watergate, disco, and the oil crisis. And a dark example of that shift is Charles Manson and his family, which began forming during the 1967 Summer of Love, but closed out that decade with the brutal murders of actress Sharon Tate and 4 others. And while the Zodiac killer's case remains unsolved, nearly all other serial cases ended in arrests, and most had something else in common. The victims were mostly white. But in the nation's capital, in 1971, the capital of America, y'all, known as Chocolate City at the time because most of the residents were Black. There's a case today, more than 50 years later, that remains unsolved. Its victims, 6 young Black women. Why are we discussing it this morning? As we noted in a recent segment on this program, Washington Informer publisher Denise Rolock Barnes, who's with us here this morning, wrote in the chat about a case that rocked the District of Columbia. We reported over the years, little is mentioned in the media and little investigation is done by authorities in cases involving African Americans, particularly Black females. And while true crime podcasts have breathed new life into the Phantom Freeway case, the Phantom Freeway killer case, mainstream media and law enforcement have continued to mostly turn a blind eye on this case where the victims are Black and female. So we decided to take a look at the Freeway Phantom murders in 1971 and 1972, where the district was terrorized by a string of brutal murders. 6 Black girls, they was aged 10 to 18. They were kidnapped, killed, and left on the side of I-295, the Anacostia Freeway. They soon, of course, took on the moniker of Freeway Phantom. It began April 25th, 1971, when 13-year-old Carol Spinks vanished without a trace from her home in Washington. The community rallied, searching for answers, hoping for her safe return. But after 6 agonizing days, their worst fears were realized. Carol's lifeless body was discovered in the 600 block of 63rd Place in Northeast. The city was left reeling from that tragedy, but little did they know that Carol's case was only the beginning. On July 8th, 1971, 16-year-old Darlenia Johnson was snatched from the streets of D.C. 6 days later, her dead body was found near Route 202 in Prince George's County. The Freeway Phantom had emerged, preying on the innocent of young girls and leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. The media dubbed him the Freeway Phantom due to the chilling proximity of the crime scene to major highways. The Phantom struck again, this time targeting 10-year-old Brenda Crockett. On July 27th, 1971, she was abducted, and later the community's worst fears were realized again when Brenda's lifeless body was discovered in a wooded area near Oxon Hill, Maryland on August 5th, 1971. The Freeway Phantom seemed relentless. His hunger for innocent lives went unabated. On October 1st, 1971, 12-year-old Nemoshiba Yates became his next victim. Her abduction haunted the hearts of the community once again. And finally, on April 26, 1972, authorities found her remains in the 8200 block of Sheriff Road in Prince George's County. The darkness continued to cast a shadow. 18-year-old Brenda Woodard was taken on November 15th, 1971, and a day later, they found her body along Suitland Parkway in Prince George's County. The Phantom struck for the final time on November 25th, 1972, claiming 17-year-old Diane Williams as his last victim. Her body was found 7 days later beside Suitland Parkway. Once again, a haunting reminder of the evil that had plagued the region. The murders have never been solved. The emotional toll on the victims' families was devastating enough. Adding to the grief, tense relations between the police and Southeast DC's Black community, who were frustrated by a seeming lack of urgency from law enforcement that resulted in the case going cold. Denise, you are the daughter of Dr. Calvin Rolock, the late Dr. Calvin Rolock, who was one of the voices calling for better policing and more attention to the Phantom Freeway murders. Denise, what do you recall about the Phantom Freeway murders?
Freeway Phantom, Stacy, and I remember it very vividly. One of the things that my father said to me sometimes, because I live on this side of town now, right? My father and stepmother lived on this side of town. 3 of the victims had the middle name Denise. And so it shows you how popular that name was during the 70s. There were a bunch of names: Denise, Deborah, Renee, Sharon, Karen. We were all that was that generation, and so that put fear in me. I was entering my last year of high school, and I remember hearing about this. But this was also on the heels of the unrest in the District of Columbia. Following the assassination of Dr. King, the city was still on fire here. And one of the biggest issues was community police relations. There were no relationships. The police department really was indifferent towards what was happening in Black communities. And this case was a prime example of their indifference. If people will take a chance and go and look some of these stories up, they'll find that in one case, a police officer was called because someone noticed a body on the side of the road. The police drove by, didn't see it, kept going. And they had to call back and say, there's the body's still there. And I think it had been there for a couple of days. So it was their lax investigation. It was their lax, control of the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't really, looking for much. In one case, I think the daughter, the girl called home and said, I've been abducted by a white man and I'm in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And then she called back and said, did my mother see me? And then I'll call you later. And then they found her, I think 2 days later.
Wow.
Dead. They all had been raped, sodomized, stabbed. One had a note that allegedly the Phantom had written. Well, that they think the victim wrote the note, but probably done so by force of who this Phantom was. And I'd say gratefully, there are officers now still within Metropolitan Police Department who are troubled by this case and want to see it closed. They think they know who the perpetrator was. In one article I read, but he died at 91 in a Virginia prison for killing 2 other girls. Mm. So, but he claimed he didn't do it. Yes, that's the letter that we're talking about. This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Freeway Phantom.
Yeah.
And so, the community was up in arms. It's something that we still don't talk about, but the relatives of these kids, I just realized one of the mothers lives 2 blocks from me.
Oh, wow.
So, she's someone I may want to reach out to. I know it's a difficult thing to remember. People are still heartbroken.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that, in recent years, well, let me just also add one other thing. Black and Missing, the organization, just held a walk in at National Harbor in Maryland last week, and there were I'll say hundreds of people that showed up to participate because the community is still concerned about our missing children, especially.
Yeah.
But we know that a lot of times when children go missing, the first thought has been they're runaways, they're coming from dysfunctional families, a lot of excuses for why they're missing.
Yep. And that's mostly when it pertains to African American kids.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's the point. And so, regardless of dysfunction or whatever you may have, parents still care, I believe, and police
Mhm.
still need to do their job. Regardless, they need to do their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that letter and Tantamount, there's a book that was written called Tantamount, The Pursuit of the Freeway Phantom Serial Killer. And one of the excerpts says about 75 residents is discussing this press conference that took place. And I think your father was involved. And in fact, your father was involved in it. About 75 residents of Congress Heights held a street corner press conference where they were trying to draw attention to, quote, poor police protection and failure to apprehend the murderers. Just 3 hours before the press conference was held, a 17-year-old girl was raped at knife point just 2 blocks away. The protest was called, this is from the book, and I'm quoting the book, it was called by Dr. Calvin Rolock, the editor of the Washington Informer and president of the Washington Highlands Civic Association. Calvin Rolock led the meeting, accusing police and the news media of failing to give equal attention to crimes, particularly in Southeast DC. And he's quoted as saying, if it was a blue-eyed white girl from Silver Spring, her picture would have been all over page 1. We are demanding from the police the same kind of services you get in Georgetown. Now, it takes 3 or 4 or sometimes 6 hours before police respond. If they don't protect us, we'll have to protect ourselves by forming vigilantes. Denise, your father was known and remains known throughout DC as, among other things, a crusader. But that is something that you mentioned the Black and Missing Foundation. They have screamed that to the hills for more than a decade now about the lack of police response. And when police do respond, you said it's something that those sisters who run the Black and Missing Foundation, Natalie Wilson, and the other sister's name is escaping me, but they said the same thing, that the first response from police is, oh, they must be runaways. It must be a drug situation or something of that nature. We see that same attitude today. It has not changed, despite something like this, the Freeway Phantom.
Exactly. I mean, I could point to another case, Stacey, which was really interesting. A young kid was missing. The community was up in arms about this child being missing. I think it was like a 9 or 10-year-old boy, missing for several days. Police, did what they do, which was not much. And so a group of men decided to comb through woods and areas in this area, and they found him with a man who had abducted him and taken him into the woods. Wow. They solved that case. And so, this is nothing new for us, unfortunately. And now in the same man that fought to change the complexion of the Metropolitan Police Department in the District of Columbia, who fought to, his fight led to a Black police chief, my father, Calvin Rolock, who fought really hard to integrate DC Police Department, still ended up with some of the same results, as it relates to solving crime. So, we cannot, while we're hollering and screaming, which we rightfully should, about, defunding and all of the other issues that we brought up since the killing of George Floyd, we can't give up. We can't let up, because clearly when it comes to Black communities, particularly poor Black communities, which is how my community is often described, there's just so much that goes on, and police just kind of take it as day-to-day, work, nothing that they need to extend any excess energy over. So it's a sad situation. I hope now that we have DNA and all these other technologies that can help to solve crimes, although a lot of the evidence was lost
Mhm.
in
Well,
the
Denise,
freeway
you know,
fantasies.
yeah, I'm sorry. We talk a lot, and we have spoken a lot about police reform, particularly since the George Floyd murder. Uh, Here's a quote again. I want to go back to a quote from your father at the time of these freeway phantom murders. He says, "For years, blacks have been at the mercy of white-run police departments who have held them at a low priority as long as blacks were killing blacks. And I haven't seen much change in this. You find a pattern of young blacks being missing and murdered, and we're never able to bring the individuals to justice. But if white folks are murdered, they don't stop investigating until they find who did it."
And this
It's just,
was this was what, 50 years ago?
yep, yep,
50
50
years ago.
years.
And he knew that because he was born in Texarkana, Texas,
Oh,
50 years prior to that,
where
right?
Otis Williams from the Temptations was from.
I know. But born in Texarkana, Texas. So he knows, he knew. He was just calling it for what it was. And people have to say it,
Yeah.
and hold people accountable. This wasn't anything that he, was shocked by. It was a fact.
Well,
And
here's a stat for you. In 1972, in the District of Columbia, there were 255 homicides. Of these, 233 or 91% were black victims and 22 were white. 24 of those cases remained unclosed from that year. 22 cases or 9.4% involved black victims, and 2 cases or 9.1% involved white victims. As such, the closure rates are almost statistically identical, they claim, between blacks and whites. But overall, when you see numbers like 255 victims were black, 233 out of 255 victims in 1972 in DC were black, I think that itself tells a story. It's not just about, and I know people will throw those stats out and say, well, black on black crime. It's not just about that at all.
no, it's not just about that. And it's about a whole lot, because in a lot of the cases, and I wouldn't say a majority, but I say a lot of the cases, the victims and the perpetrators knew each other. In some cases, they're neighbors. In a lot of cases, people just won't uh, tell police what they know.
Mhm.
So a lot of these cases continue to go unsolved. And in many cases, particularly when it's juveniles that are involved, even their parents might even know,
Right,
what
right.
their kids have done and why. And maybe again, it's our distrust of the criminal justice system. It's our distrust of prisons and the fact that people go in and come out the same way. That's not a rehabilitative process for dealing with the problems that a lot of parents or family members have been dealing with so long, and they knew that it's a powder keg. Eventually, something's going to happen. I've called you 5 times about my kid who just won't act right,
Yep.
and you won't respond until they commit a crime.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, it's on you now. I'm not saying nothing. I already told you what I was going to tell you.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. So also found this. We also dug this up too because back then during the uh, Phantom
Phantom,
Freeway
freeway
murders,
phantom. Mhm,
Freeway Phantom.
mhm.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. Freeway Phantom instead of it is. But here's an important thing to note. With 60 officers working homicides, right? Not just that particular case. The police's reaction was that they were doing their jobs. The police, though, said this. It was the newspapers and televisions that were not doing theirs. What what's I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, that's the pot kettle, we're calling the kettle black. But the point is still well taken, because again, you know, I mean, well, I have to say at the time, 1970s, we had about maybe 10 Black-owned newspapers in DC.
Hmm.
We were flush with newspapers. There's my dad. And a lot of our publications were more focused on social events and entertainment and what have you, because, you know, I mean, maybe not having the capacity to cover crime. That's as it relates to the Black press. But in other media, especially in this part of town, there was nothing reported. This didn't even, Ward 8 Southeast did not exist when it came to the media in DC. And when it did, you know, it may be a paragraph or so about the crimes that were being committed, but nothing about a community of people who actually, in many ways, were forced to this area because of what a lot of people used to call Negro displacement, pushing them from Georgetown to Foggy Bottom to Southwest to you know, over to where we are now. A lot of folks were forced over here. So it was almost like putting you on a reservation and then ignoring you, not providing you with resources, not providing you with equal access to funding for public schools, deplorable housing, all of that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, why write about them? They're not a significant tax base to the city. You know, let's talk about the people that make the city work. Although a lot of the workers lived here. This is a lot of government housing over here. So, you know, there are all kinds of fingers that can be pointed in a lot of different directions, always. But the point is, like my daddy used to say, if it is to be, it's up to me. Do my job. And he also always said, no one can save us for us but us.
Yeah.
Right? It's on us to, unfortunately, regardless of who we're paying our taxes to, it's still up to us to address the issues that affect our community. We can't put that on anybody else because they are not going to assume the responsibility.
Well, that's exactly what Captain Robert Boyd of the DC police did back then. And his is a quote from Captain Boyd. He says, "The media folks say, anything happened? And we say, yeah, man, we closed the case today. We worked like hell on it. Tough case. Then we tell them the victim was someone in the Southeast area and they are not interested. They don't write it up."
Wow. So I'm not lying.
There you go.
I mean, you know, not that I needed, you know, verification or whatever, but you know, we just see it. We've been seeing it for years, which is why we're here.
Which is why we're here. Yeah. And it's interesting too that you talked about the young girl that called from Virginia. They found her in Virginia. This is what Captain Boyd described. This is how he offered a profile of the freeway phantom killer. He says, quote, "My hunch is that he's a Negro male, above 30, between 35 and 45. My ideal suspect is a good sized male. I don't know why I know, but I do. I don't see him as a small sized person." He postulated in the interview that the killer had to gain trust with the victims. He could have worn a uniform of a fireman or a security guard or just drove a taxi, is what Captain Boyd said. He mentioned all the military bases around Anacostia at the time, and he said that a military man would be a, quote, damn good suspect.
You know, I'm gonna tell you, Stacey, I remember a couple years ago, well, a couple of decades ago now, but when there was a curfew law and or a curfew in DC, particularly in this area, and the concern I had was that if a young Black person, particularly a young girl, was out late or after 8 o'clock, and a police officer stopped them and asked, you know, questioned them, you know, you can't feel safe because it's a police officer. You can't trust him or her, but in most cases him, that it's that because they're a police officer. And it was something about the way that law was written that raised real concern with me, because we know that people will use their uniforms, their authority, what have you, to abuse people and to harm people. And you know, you've always got to be on the lookout. And I say that particularly with our young women, especially, It could be even your daddy, unfortunately. But we really have to teach them to be aware. Unfortunately, in a couple of these cases, the girls were sent out to the store, after a certain hour. One was coming home from school after a certain hour, and you should be able to, be free to do that.
Yeah.
But a 10-year-old going to a 7-Eleven at 8 o'clock at night, um, you got to think twice about that. And I'm not saying that, so the decisions that parents make sometimes out of necessity are bad decisions. I'm just saying that you have to recognize that in this day and time, 50 years ago in time, 100 years ago in time, you're putting your child at risk,
Yeah.
of harm. And so, it's, I don't know what more I can say about that.
Yeah,
But
there's always this specter though when it comes to young people, especially disappearing and being victims of like the Freeway Phantom, the Atlanta child murders comes to mind, of it being a law enforcement person involved because again, Captain Boyd talked about someone they trust and a lot of times we hear that when they're profiling a serial killer. They thought that about Jeffrey Dahmer. I go back again to I spoke to Ambassador Andrew Young a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him about the Atlanta child murders case because he was just coming in as mayor as that case was going to trial, and he gave me some revelations about that particular case as he watched up close. But we remember that case because 29 people were killed, including I think 22 of them were children, and so it was dubbed the Atlanta child murders case. Wayne Williams is in jail. He's been in jail 41 years for murdering. He was convicted of murdering 2 adults. So in essence, those child murders were never solved. But in reality, they have concluded that he committed all the murders. But while that was happening, Denise, I just remember believing, and I was a kid I was in the age range 10 to 12, 79 to 81 when it was happening. I just remember thinking, because there was reports about the Ku Klux Klan, there was reports about law enforcement. It had to have been either someone they trusted or someone who they feared. It was one or the other. It was one or the other. Wayne Williams never struck me as someone who you would fear if you walk down a dark street. Not that he couldn't be dangerous. Now, the ambassador says that he believes that Wayne Williams was very much capable of these murders. He just never, he seemed like this bumbling idiot who was a freelance photographer. And yet again, the victims in this case were, just not to get off point, but they were African Americans. And so to close that case, after convicted him of 2 adult murders, not the kids, really, it didn't sit well with a lot of people in Atlanta. In fact, before she left office last year, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms ordered that case to be reopened, and it's an open investigation again while Wayne Williams sits in jail.
Well, I'm with you, Stacey, but you can't, these days it looks like you call them. I mean, they try to come up with a description of, just with these mass murders, what does the person look like? And it has gone from what we had here, the I'm forgetting what it was, but anyway, you have, you paint a picture and it ends up being somebody completely different.
Yeah. Well, you described the white man, right, early for the Virginia, and then you got the Chief Boyd saying that, or Captain Boyd saying that it was a black male. He believes it was a black man.
Yeah.
At least his profile was that of a black man.
Right. Well, we chased folks. Who was it? I don't know why I can't think of Muhammad. In the what was the case?
Oh, Boyd, the freeway shooters, the DC sniper, DC sniper.
And none of these shootings were in DC, by the way. But
Right.
anyway, but because DC is a predominantly Black city, and let's call it that. But they didn't know who they were looking for. They had no idea.
Boyd Malvo.
Right. But all they knew was a white box truck.
Yep.
That was the main thing that they kept looking for. But was he Black? Was he white? What have you? And so, I mean, I think I don't do police work. I'm one of those folks on the end that, I'm like everybody else trying to speculate on who, it's got to be a white man. Oh, it's got to be a Black man. We don't know.
Why do they have to be Black?
They got to be big. They got to have to be small. They're well educated. They've got mental health issues, whatever. We create all these stories about, the perpetrators. And then once we see them, we're trying to figure out, does it match up? No, a lot of times it doesn't.
Well, listen, I remember being in New York for the Son of Sam thing. I was, born and raised in New York, and that was 1977, the year of the blackout. And I think so that made me about 9 years old. And I remember it so vividly. And I remember all of the profiles of David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam at the time. We didn't know his identity, but the Son of Sam. And when they finally got this guy, I think by that time there may have been 20 different profiles. 19 of them were way off. There was one of the profiles that did kind of, when you saw him, like, oh, is that one?
Yeah.
So you're right. These profiles are often, you just can't go on these profiles. But Denise, this case, podcasts have brought it back to life.
Yes.
Mainstream media still pretty much turns a blind eye to it. And as you said, obviously, without even saying it, the families are still suffering, no matter how, 50 years ago, their lives changed forever. What sets this case apart in your mind from other similar crimes, other serial killers, and how has it been remembered in the years since the murders took place?
Well, first of all, I think what sets it apart is that it's still unsolved. And, with a lot of these other cases, they have come to some resolution, but it's unsolved. And a lot of the evidence is gone. And so, but at the same time, you still have folks that are keeping the story alive in their own way. There's still members of the police department that are still just, they're trying to put the puzzle pieces together. Like someone described it as it's like putting a big puzzle piece without having the frame. It's really difficult to do, but fortunately there are folks that are still trying to solve it. And it's almost a forgotten story in DC, and mainly because we still have, we're still trying to find Relisha Rudd. The young, at the time, I think she was 8 years old, befriended by a man. Her mother, she and her mom were living in a shelter, a city-run shelter. And the man that she was abducted by ends up being murdered. His wife is murdered, and she disappears. No one knows where Relisha is, and the folks are still trying to find her. And that's been maybe about 10 years ago. Yeah, exactly. So, when we tell these stories, and I don't think they're being told in households either. That's the other thing. I mean, they're forgotten. And so we're still seeing kids out late at night by themselves, unaccompanied, like I said, unaccompanied with an adult, or an adult they can trust. And the stories get brushed under the rug. And, we're just, I think, susceptible to so much of this still happening. And I'm glad that you brought this up. I really did. I just only brought it up because when any story happens like this, the first thing I think about is the Freeway Phantom.
Wow.
But otherwise,
it was interesting. I never heard you mention that before. I've been with you 10 years.
Yeah.
And I've never heard you mention that before. Maybe I wasn't paying attention.
Well,
me, I zoned out.
because you were talking about, the case in Atlanta.
Right.
Otherwise, no. I mean, it's and we probably need to do a better job of keeping some of these unsolved murders and missing
Well,
children alive. We're just not doing as good a job as we could. But this is a very old case,
well,
and
I remember
still
Denise,
suffering.
and Denise is gonna smack me around for this one, but I remember about 5, 6 years ago, maybe it was about 5 years ago, I presented to you and your then editor, a guy named Mr. McNear. I proposed a series of something like this, and I was never given the green light to do it.
Maybe the battery died. I don't know, but no,
Nonetheless,
yeah.
nonetheless, but
So,
the
and thanks for
Washington
bringing that up. But yeah, I don't know. I
and
don't
Militia Rudd was among that.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
but as you mentioned, though, the black newspapers and the resources have never really been there at all. But what the Washington Informer did do in the case of the Freeway Phantom was, as we've been talking about this morning, Dr. Roloff was front and center. He was the leader and trying to bring some resolution to that case. He was very vocal about it. And so, as a publisher of a black newspaper, among other things, so obviously, I'm only talking about his role as publisher, but he was certainly, as we talked about, a community leader above and beyond. But so that was the role, perhaps, Denise, that the Informer could play at that time.
Hmm. Well, it was, and you have to understand too that we were still. I don't even know if that was the year, or maybe it was 72 when we held our first election in the District of Columbia. We were still a commissioner form of government. We didn't have black leadership in the city, not only in the police department, but in the local government. And it was a very, as a period where black folks were saying, look, we have to be in control of the city because things like this are being allowed to happen. And we have no say in it. So consequently, we had our first black elected mayor. I think it was in 72. And not that things changed, but at least people were put in positions to do
Right.
jobs. But yeah, that was his role at the time, to make sure that black folks, especially on this side of the city, where he and my stepmother decided that they wanted to begin their lives together, that it became that it was recognized. 4 years later, or three, in 74, she became the elected council member for Ward 8, the second council member for this community. And the two of them together were very outspoken and engaged and proactive in dealing with a lot of issues that impact this community. So, I just sat at the feet and watched and admired and learned and understood because of the work that they did. And, you're right. I think that our publications, now that we've come through a crisis in publishing, I say come through, we're still in it. We're still in
It's
it.
always a crisis
We
in the
are
black
still
press.
in it.
Always.
Yeah, but thanks, because we have individuals like you who understand the job and the mission of the Black
Greer, are
press.
you recording that?
Yeah. So, hey, and we're using our platforms now. We didn't have this platform before. Well, my father had a radio show.
Right.
We didn't have a
Right.
radio show.
Chris Bennett out in Seattle with the radio station. There's,
Yeah.
I'm sure Hiram has a few radio stations. But you're right. And this platform, not to get off topic, Denise, but how important is this platform for the Black press, yours for the Washington Informer locally, but for the Black press in general, to have something like Let It Be Known?
It's, it goes back to what John Russwurm and Samuel Cornish said in the beginning. And that is, we need, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially we need to speak for ourselves. Things can't go on, or we can't be talking about ending slavery without having Black people involved in the conversation, right? So nobody's asking us anything. Let us talk about it. Let us create our own media, which is a powerful, the fourth estate, in America, the most powerful institution outside in the Black community, outside of the Black church, right? So, let's use this as our pulpit to tell the stories about our community, to give, to amplify the voices. I hate to say give our community a voice, because our community has voices, but to amplify those voices on the issues that are important to us. And so let it be known clearly, has spent, wow, how long have you been doing this now, Stacey? 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
3 years, and while our viewership may be, we're not getting the CNNs or the whatever kinds of viewers at the time that we air at 7:30 every morning, Monday through Friday. But with the support of our viewers, what we want them to do is to share that information with others, to share this program with others, to make sure that others get to see it. Don't keep it to ourselves. You see a program, you see a segment, something you like, it's on Facebook, it's on YouTube, share it and let others know what's going on around the country. And you talk about not only the country, but the world. So it's extremely important so that people know and have, like Kathy used to say with Radio One, information is power. And we operate sometimes off of disinformation. But
because not everybody's not everybody's going to go to the website.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. No, they're not.
And the website really has to be extremely appealing in the first place, right? And I know you spent a lot of time on the Washington Informer's website, revamping and retooling it. And even with that, the digital aspect, this part, thus we have Win TV on Fridays at noon.
Exactly. Every Friday from 12 to 1.
Yeah. Bobby Henry, who's watching this morning, he has a 2-minute warning every Thursday night. 8 o'clock. You got Jeffrey Boney for the Forward Times, Real Talk Junkies, every Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and Al McFarlane and his show, Conversations with Al McFarlane, from Insight News.
One of the things, I'm going to cut you off really quick, but one of the things that would really be cool if when NMPA had its national conference, that we do like the Congressional Black Caucus does and have Radio Row. And all of us, but we got to have people there to talk to as well. But
Power 96 says, well, I'm here every day. Power 96 brings trouble every day, Denise.
I love it. And I feel like the show's not complete unless I hear something from Power 96.
Tell me about, and David Youngblood. David sits in the cut and then he gives us something every day to chew on. So
and Stacey, it's not only, it's, you're an equal opportunity guest host or host, because you got women and you got men. You know what I mean? You're non-discriminating when it comes to who your guests are in the morning, and I think that's important. I was interested. I was looking at the similarities. All you need is those glasses. When Greer put up that photo of my dad, maybe it's the complexion and the white hair, but
you told me that before.
Yeah.
I'm not hating on it. That's for sure. I'd like to have Dr. Rolock's intellect, though. Give me his intellect.
Oh, you got it. It comes primarily from Prairie View, A&M University, and the street of hard knocks.
There you go. Hey, there's no more impactful degree than one from the School of Hard Knocks, the streets of Hard Knocks.
That's right.
But Denise, this freeway phantom case is, it's one that we're so glad that you reminded us of it. You brought it to our attention, because I think these cases, I don't care how old, how cold, there are families that are still. I can only imagine if I lost God forbid, if I lost a loved one today, a child especially, and I live to be 200 years old. For all those 200 years, I will be hurting.
Yeah, it's bad enough to lose a child, but to lose a child to a gruesome murderer, who stalked that child, abused that child, and then killed that child.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he didn't just, you know, like these random shootings. I mean, these children went through some suffering before they were eventually killed. And so it's you know, you're painting all kinds of pictures in your head. And as a mother, a sister, a father, a relative, a grandmother, you know, it's a sense of guilt too that you
Yeah.
never get over.
Yeah, because you mentioned like sending them to the store, you know, at certain times and walking home, even walking home from school. Even today, especially, well, I guess today things have not gotten better. In fact, there's an argument to say that they've gotten worse. You know, my 16-year-old, she would like to walk home from school. No, it's not happening.
Yeah.
And one day she did walk, and you know, first of all, I have two things. You have the tracker right on the phone, you know exactly where they are, but the other thing is the whole time she's on FaceTime, the whole time, the whole walk. That
Yeah,
one I
so she's not
so
looking up around. She
it,
doesn't know anything about her environment. She doesn't know what to look out for. Yeah, you
so
know.
no, what I'm saying, and you're right about that part, but I'm saying I made sure she's on FaceTime with me the whole time so I can see her home.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, okay.
But I get your point on that too. It's just a you know, one of those feelings that you just never ever want anybody, you know, let alone yourself, but anybody, you know, anybody, even if you don't know, you don't want anybody to experience that.
Right.
So
Well, I guess in closing, one of the things I would that troubles me now is children. I heard someone say this the other day that children see and know how we have abandoned them. You know, that we're not protecting them. We let things happen and we don't fight for them. You
mhm,
know, and consequently they feel defenseless, and as a result of that, their behavior, um, you know, has no guardrails
right.
because there's no one that's putting guardrails around them. And sometimes, you know, I mean, I'm a mother who wasn't as harsh on my boys as my husband was, but you know, we tried to develop a relationship of trust. I'm learning now that, you know, you learn stories later, but at any rate, but the point is, you know, if children don't think that they're loved and cared for and protected,
Yep,
then they're going to do anything because they don't know what not to do.
exactly.
And you know, we really have to do. And did you know? I was it last Sunday or this Sunday? Is Children's Day, National Children's Day.
Yeah, you know why I knew? It's because of social media. Because otherwise I would not have known.
Well, my mother told me that the other day. She says, "We don't celebrate Children's Day like we used to." And I'm like, "Did we ever celebrate? We didn't celebrate it when I was a child, so I don't remember." She said, "Oh, when I was a child, we did blah 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 blah." And I was like, "I never knew that." So, yes, celebrate a child on Sunday.
Yeah,
And I don't know what you can do, but if nothing else, just give them a hug and tell them you love them.
exactly. Well,
That's your
then,
gift. You don't buy any presents, don't do anything. Just give them a hug and tell them you love them.
yeah, exactly. And I will say, I have to say, in my house, the girls, it's a whole lot of love. They just hug, they kiss, and it's like, give me some more, give me some more.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, I just hope that these I appreciate those cops who are I got a little cold here, Stacey. But I just hope that those officers and FBI agents and others that are investigating this case don't give up.
yeah,
Just don't give up
absolutely.
and see if we can find at least some resolution. The perpetrator may be dead and gone by now, but they should, you know, still be held accountable for their acts.
There's no question about it. Thanks so much, Denise Roloff Bonds, the publisher of the Washington Informer. Um, Denise, you can find all the stuff at WashingtonInformer.com. It's not a weekly paper, y'all. It's the paper, physical paper is weekly, but it's a daily 24-hour news operation. It is what hopefully all of our Black Press members are doing because the Informer does it so well. Congratulations, Denise, Misha. You got a great team, Sam. and Kayla. You know, those are my favorites over there. Lindy's over there. So keep up the great work, and y'all got to check out the great work. She even lets me contribute. So there you go.
I need you, Stacey. I need you.
They just won
Bobby-
some awards, Denise. Before we go, we got to go. But tell us real quick the awards the Informer just won.
So we won 2 awards from the Society of Professional Journalists here in DC. One was for a special edition, which was our year in review issue, and I think for layout and design. I'm not remembering what they both were. The awards program is next Tuesday, so I will be there representing the Informer. And we got our fingers crossed for NMPA awards too this year. We're going to see, what we come out with, but
Tennessee. Tennessee.
I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in Nashville.
Yep. The last several years, you've won Society of Professional Journalists Awards. So
yes, we have. Yeah.
Read the Informer.
For former editor Kevin McNair actually won one for one of his columns as well. So
there you have it. There's Kevin.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this very, very, very sensitive but very important topic, the Freeway Phantom. Perhaps somebody will get wind of this in the right place, and maybe there will finally be somebody who is able to close that case. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
All right.